this journey we'll guide inside the ride where we fly. Virtual roads touch the sky. Join us here, don't be shy. Inside the ride, yeah, we hide.
Welcome back to Inside the Ride by MyWhoosh. I am your host, Cy Bradley. I want to say Happy New Year. Welcome to episode 18. Yes, we're back in 2025, and I'm delighted to say I'm joined by head coach here at MyWhoosh, Zach Neer. Ready to kick off the year, Zach. I guess this is the right time of year because people are starting to think about training, New Year's resolutions. Maybe people have got some events in spring and summer that they're targeted for. So great to have you back on the show, Zach.
Yeah, thanks, Cy. It's really good to be back. And like you said, the new year, it's always a good time to, whether you're continuing your fitness journey or just starting it. I think a lot of people are just starting a new fitness journey or maybe a new challenge at this time. So it's a really good time to try new things. And I would probably avoid the gym on January 1st, but maybe after that, you can start your routine.
I mean, it's got busier and busier around these MyWhoosh parts recently, Zach, hasn't it, anyway? And I'm expecting it to ramp up even more, I guess, from January the 1st. My wife's already asking me, saying, hey, when do I get to go on your bike and sort of reignite my account again? So she'll be getting on soon, and I'm sure with a lot of other people at the same time. Zach, I guess the other thing, you mentioned challenges there as well, is it today essentially when this podcast goes out, or maybe it was yesterday, we've got the MyWhoosh 300. So I don't know, I know you were involved in the planning in this. Have you taken part?
Yes, of course. Yeah. It was something that, I was lucky enough to help put it together. And I think I have about 50 or 55 kilometers left at the time of this recording, which I think I have one ride left. So it's going to be a little longer than I'm used to. I usually do just an hour during the week. It'll probably be 2 hours today or tomorrow and to finish out the challenge. But it's been really good. And I see a lot of people doing it and posting about it. It's really cool at this time of year to be able to do that.
It's really been amazing, actually, the engagement that this little initiative has had. And we spoke about this before, and I spoke about it with Matt and so on, that I think that 300 just makes it achievable for a lot of people. Saying that, I don't know if I'm actually going to get there yet. I'm close, but I've also just got a bit of a back injury. But I'm hoping that I might have to do a big 2 hour, or it might end up being 2.5 hours tomorrow just to close the gap and finish it off. But it's been great to see the engagements. I had people like Michael Kaminsky message me 2 days ago and said, how quickly could I get a group workout organized for 4 hours? Because there's a bunch of us over here in Poland who want to get this done. And there's like 45 of them rolling around. What route did they use in the end? I think it was, what's the desert one out there in the UAE that we're using?
Sands of Time.
Yeah,
that one.
The Al Wathba circuit there. So they did 4 hours looping around that circuit there, because it's obviously pan flat as well, and they just wanted to make sure they covered the distance, taking it off. And then I had Lionel Vujasan also messaged me. So I think he's sort of doing the same as me. He's got a Tuesday session planned just to make sure he gets it done and picks up those final Ks. But I know it's not just the challenges. You've been busy racing as well this weekend, Zach.
Yeah, I have. It was another double race weekend. Saturday was Echelon Racing League, and that was my best ride so far. It was the first time I made the front group in those races, so that was a big moment for me to make it through the hardest part of the race. And there are a few guys left, and I was up there. I was used to getting dropped in those moments, so it's always good to have that effort to make the front group, and you look back and this is probably the winning move, and that's a really good feeling.
I'll tell you why I'm laughing, Zach. You say front group. It was basically you and one of the athletes that you coach, basically, right? It was you and Hayden Pucker, because I did watch it. I raced the Category B race. We'll talk about that course in a minute as well. But then I tuned into your race. I really wanted to watch the ladies, but I thought I better watch the men as well. And saw you and Hayden up the road. So was that... we know you're the tactician now, the master tactician. That's what I'm going to call you as well when it comes to MyWhoosh racing. But that was pre-planned, right? You knew what you were doing there.
Yeah. It was pre-planned down to a 200-meter stretch of road on that course. It was something that I looked at very carefully. I looked at how the other races had panned out and the competition and kind of our strengths and weaknesses versus the other riders. And It was one of those moments where it was, I think there's 7 rollers on that course back to back to back. And
There is, yeah.
and I knew the first one was going to be super hard, and it was. There was a big attack up that one, and the group really stretched out and thinned out, and there were gaps forming everywhere. But then it kind of came back together because everyone was still pretty fresh. And we went over the second roller, it kind of calmed down a little bit, but everyone was, I mean, the lactate was through the roof, and it was super, super hard. And then our pre-planned attack was, I said, on the third roller. There's not really a super special reason it was the third roller. It was just, I like to have those points where it's 100% commitment right here. It's not some time on this climb or sometime in this 10K stretch of the race.
Yeah.
I like to have those attacks where it's right here as the road goes from 0% to 6%. We're just going to launch at 700-800 watts and just hold that gap hold that attack for 2 minutes. And that was another really important part of that move, is that I noticed in the other races, the other riders can match that acceleration for maybe 30 or 40 seconds. But if you keep that attack going for a minute or two, that's when people start to crack. And I knew that very well because in the first couple races, I was that rider that was cracking. I could make it about a minute 10, a minute 20, and then Hayden would attack for 2 minutes, and then I would just get dropped right in that last part. And he's right there. It's so close, but I just couldn't do it in the moment. And this time, because I knew that was the plan, I raced it like that was my finish line for that 2 minute attack. And then it was perfect in that last 30 seconds of that attack was when the last 2 or 3 riders dropped off. They were 1 second behind us. I could see it on the map. They were 1 second behind us for probably 500 or 600 meters. And we just kept going, kept pushing. And then all of a sudden we saw their power go from 8 watts a kilo down to 2. And right at that moment, you're like, this is the gap.
Off.
You just got to keep going. And
it's gone.
That was perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting how you say that, because I had a similar plan. Unfortunately, I'm lacking the fitness and the legs right now to actually to follow that through. And then I quickly realized at that point that I've just got to survive and try and hold on to that front group as possible. So it's interesting. But even when I'm going well and I know I can compete, those times when, I guess Hayden has this more than anyone else right now, looking at the form he's in, but you just know you're in control and you can pick your moments like that. But it's still really difficult to do because you don't know how the other riders, maybe Thomas Thrall had a plan to go earlier or later, or someone else in that group, right? So being able to follow those things through and action it the way you did, and not always as straightforward, but it clearly did in this time. And I saw a few riders try and get across and hang on, and like I say, that moment came where eventually they just sat up. But yeah, those roles were really interesting because I think I've said this before, but I was involved with the Echelon team to try and pick the routes for this time. And I thought this one will be a little bit easier than it was, but second time around hitting those, because everyone just hit every roller. The first 2 are the longer ones, right? 300 meters, and then after that it's like 150 meter each one. But everyone was just hitting each one full gas.
Yeah.
It was like the worst interval training you could ever do on that circuit. I really enjoyed it, actually. It was good fun, despite getting dropped on the second lap midway through those rollers. So
yeah, it was one of those things where with my coach analytical brain, I thought it was going to be like an interval workout, and I actually went back to my file after the race to see the exact timing of each roller and the recoveries. And the first 2 rollers were a little bit longer, and then after that, pretty much every single roller, it was 30 seconds on the uphill and then 20 seconds on the downhill. And it was just repeats like that. And I was like, it was perfect for all the intervals that I've been doing and that I've been giving to Hayden. It's you do 30 15s, 30 30s, 40 20s. And it was just that perfect amount of just punch where you can just hit it up on the uphill and then over the top. And then that recovery period, it's really short. But when you're doing it in training, you're used to that. And then it's really short. Your heart rate comes down a tiny bit. And then you just kick again, but that next kick is nice and short. And it was a really cool course because there's very, very few courses that have efforts like that, where it really is 30 seconds on, 15, 20 seconds off, just repeated like that. Usually it's 3-minute climb, 5-minute climb, 10-minute climb, or something else. So it was really cool to have that course.
Yeah, I think it's pretty good. The fact that we've got some of these more community organisers coming on. We've got lots more racing happening as well, particularly now because from the 1st of January we've got the new daily events coming through with rapid racing. We've got the split categories now with the MyWhoosh raid races and the crit races and so on. That racing should get much more competitive, and I think it's great to see more of these sort of flatter to rolling courses where you can have a bit of fun and play around, and almost like you said there, there's a reason why the people who attend my live coaching sessions for the last month, that's probably the reason why we've done more 40-20s in the last month than anything else, because I knew this was coming at this point, and I thought this is the one I'm gonna get round. I didn't, but it was worth a shot anyway. But I'm determined, Zach, that I am going to get round this one this week. I don't think you even know what the route is this week, because we've had a little bit of a change in the route. So we're going to Colombia, and we're going to do the coffee trail ride. Coffee trail it's called, yeah. So that's the route, 27 to almost 28 kilometers, and it's pretty much flat. But in Colombia, you've got those bridges, which are like 100 meters each time. And there's 7 of those. Everyone's going to go full gas and try and keep the pressure on after. And then there's a climb right at the end, which is 400 meters. So it's only short. It's going to be less than 40 seconds. Probably only 30 seconds for you guys. And then it's 800 meter sprint to the finish. So it's going to be, again, some interesting racing, both in the men's and the ladies, I think, this weekend across all categories. And there's just one rider that we've got to watch. This Jonathan Bisson, I think his name is, from Canada in the community racing. He's a time trialist, I understand, and we cannot let him ride off again. He just keeps riding. A bit like Hayden did. He's done it twice now, I think, in the last 3 weeks. So whatever happens, Cat B riders, can we not let Jonathan Bisson go up the road this time, please? Anyway, Sunday Race Club. You said it was a back-to-back weekend for you. You raced Sunday Race Club, totally different, because we were on. I didn't race. It was Jabal Helfit, I think, this weekend.
Yes,
right?
It was. Yeah,
So how did you get on there?
It was. I would say it went pretty well. It wasn't great for me. I knew that course is probably the worst course for me. I am not a pure climber, and that finish is 25 to 30 minutes straight uphill, really steep, but. Yeah. There was actually a huge attack in the first half of our race right before and up the aquarium climb. And there was a massive split in the Cat 1 race where I think maybe 9-10 guys went over the top in the front group. And then I was in a group of, I think, 5 or 6 that was off the back of that. And then everyone else was dropped even further behind that. I think I was around 450 watts for 5 minutes. And I think I was 13, 14 seconds behind the front group at the top of the climb. I looked afterwards, and I think I needed 475 or 480s. And it's just, I didn't have an extra 30 watts in the legs for that effort, but it came.
It's not easy to find.
Yeah. Especially at 4 a.m. It's still the early racing for us, which is waking up at that time. It's so hard. And I have a really good routine with it. I've been doing it for a couple of years, but it's one of those things where it doesn't really get easier. It's still, you're just waking up in the middle of the night, you're warming up in the dark, and you're having a caffeine gel, and everyone's still sleeping. It's hard to get going. But it started to come back together in the second half of that race in SRC, and I was trying to help my teammates close the gap up the final climb. And it was one of those efforts where I went so deep on the aquarium climb that I was really cramping. So it was really, really hard to recover in that moment. But then I had 10, 15 minutes kind of sitting in the group and trying to recover as much as I could. And then on the final climb, all of a sudden I kind of felt better. So I was able to push it a little bit and get up there in the team standings. And it was nothing special, but it was fun to watch in the replay afterwards. I always watch the replay afterwards just to see what happened in the front group, because I'm 5 minutes behind.
No, I do exactly that. I mean, even watched the Echelon Racing League back again that evening. Again, just to see what happens in other races, but also just to see where it all fell apart sometimes, and what you could do differently next time round. So it's interesting, Zach, because you mentioned nutrition there. You also mentioned trying to find some extra watts. So quite often when I'm struggling in these races, searching in the back pocket of the jersey, trying to find some extra watts or whatever we can find, and see, trying to find those gels as well. That's one of the topics we're going to be talking about a little bit later on today, which is fueling for the events. I guess fueling for training as well is something that we're going to talk about. And then I know you want to talk about Zone 2 as well, because Zone 2 can often be associated with base training. and we're in that time of year, as we've said there. I do, though, just before we want to jump onto that topic, because I promised the community I'm going to work through these categories every week when it comes to SRC. So I think it is important that I just give the Category 2 riders a shout this week. Although saying that, I do it every week, but I've got to talk about that ladies' race again. Kate McCarthy and Gabby and Molly Bruni also was coming back at both of those girls on that climb. Just epic racing week in, week out. Go and check that out. But for the men, Sunday Race Club, Category 2, Ross Fawcett from the Hitmen took the victory there as well. Great to see Ross coming back. So obviously, I think he, again, historically at some point, SRC, he was a Cat 1 rider. Very talented rider. So good to see him after a little bit of time off the bike, getting back and taking the victory in the final. SS was second. And Ivan Nuki, a guy I met when I was in the UAE, down at the Abu Dhabi Cycling Club, picked up third as well. So great job, Ivan, there, picking up the results on the finals. Always important. For the ladies, it was Amanda Paulson taking the victory. Another rider that I have met. I met her at a live event, actually, in the UK, which is Sophie Giovanni from the Globe Trotters there, picking up second. And Jermaine, should I say, Prado there from the Globe Trotters picking up third. So great results. I think it's important, Zach, that we continue to pick up on these community riders. And talking about community riders in SRC, before we get on to those two hot topics, Zach, that you want to talk about from a coaching point of view, some changing coming to SRC. More categories, so more riders potentially hitting here, and some other ways, I guess, to pick up not just the prize money, but the points when it comes to racing as well. I know you're part of that team. I say this every week. I'm not part of the SRC team, but I know you are. So it's, looking forward to see more riders and more categories.
Yeah, it's a number of really big changes that it's one of those things that we've been listening to the community for a long time. And I think the variety that we have with adding the sprints and the climb segments and the prizes spread across more places and more teams, I think the racing is just going to be more exciting and more explosive, like all the way through every single category, men and women. I think it's just going to be really, really exciting. And I think a few riders have it's gotten a little stale with some of the courses, and it kind of feels like the same efforts week in and week out. It's like you go into the course knowing if I'm going to get top 5, I need to hold this power on this climb. So it almost feels more like a time trial and less about the racing. And now throwing those segments and climbs through and the prizes for those and more prizes at the finish. I mean, it's going to be the racing. I'm excited, but I'm also nervous because I know that there's not going to be those long places to recover on the flats, where if there's 2 sprint segments, before it was kind of, we just recover. This is the point where we relax and get ready for the next climb. And now it's just going to be constant attacks and sprints the entire race, which is just, it's hard to imagine SRC being harder, but I think it's going to be harder.
Yeah, I mean, it's an evolution, right? It's for me, even before I was working here, SRC has always been the pinnacle of cycling esports, I think, in the last couple of years. But it's been hard racing. I turned up well over a year ago now. And I know there were people doing it a lot longer than me. I know you were around doing SRC way before I was here. But it's been that pinnacle event, and I think this is a natural evolution. The exciting thing for me, think about I'm in a good day, a 4.3 watts kilo. When I was really fit, when I first started to join, and I was in Cat 3, picking up some results. I'm more of a 4.1 now. I think Matt Smithson is slowly wearing me down, keeping me busy. The legs are getting slower, and my weight is gradually creeping up. So I need to stop that. But the fact that it's just going to be much more accessible, because we're looking at Category 5, Category 6 as well. So having riders below 3.0, maybe down to below 2.5 watts per kilogram FTP, I think, it's just going to broaden that pool of riders that come in as well and make it much more accessible for people. Just from a power point of view, that's one aspect. But as you said, that if riders want to come in and chase points on a segment or chase some of the prize money and the reward that you get on the segments, you can do that as well. So I think that's going to make it broader. But also, as you said there, and we've seen this now with other races on the platform, as community have started to build these events, that we're going to have new routes. And you and I have seen some of the routes that we're going to be using. That also is going to open it up to a different style of rider. Like I say, and I know where we are when it comes to that time that we do Jabal Hell Feet or whatever it might be, whichever circuit it's going to be. But those races are going to change completely. If we have something that's a bit more flatter to roll in, if you like, not forgetting the ladies are also going to be matching the distance of the men now as well, but they're going to be flatter, faster routes available to us that potentially there will be no let up, like you say. So it's going to be different racing week in, week out. There's probably going to be very little time to sit in and enjoy the bunch, enjoy the virtual scenery as such, because you don't know when it's going to go. But it might mean that someone like you, who I know you love to play around with the tactics and these kind of things, maybe opens up some new, exciting, interesting tactical decisions that we can make. So I don't know. January is going to be super interesting. Influx of riders, broader categories. I'm really excited. I haven't raced in December at all, I don't think, SRC, because I've been doing the Echelon, but my name is down for that first Sunday. I'm not missing that as well. So super, super cool racing. Zach, we're already, I don't know how long we're into this show, but we've said this before, right? We've got to be careful that we don't get carried away on topics because we're both super excitable individuals. Shall we move on to your two hot topics of this week, which is nutrition is the first one. And I've already lined up the questions. And one of the reasons I lined up the questions here, and this is just something to think about, we don't get onto it straight away. You're in charge, Zach. But I look at you see my training room behind me here, and I've got a little training table at the side that has my nutrition on it. It has very little on it when I'm racing. Basically a bottle of orange squash, maybe some electrolyte now and again. And then I'll look at some of the tables of the elites out there, and I'm looking at Hayden's on his social media, and he's got numerous gels, cans of Coke, all sorts of stuff, let me put it that way, nutritionally. I was going to use a rude word, but just all sorts of things that sit on that table there. For a 45 to 60 minute race, talk to us about nutrition. Where do you want to start in this topic?
Oh, you're right. It is a huge topic, and it's hard to know where to start. But I think the biggest thing that pops into my head is the huge shift in carbohydrate intake that's kind of happened in cycling in the past few years, maybe in the last decade or two, where I think for a long time there wasn't really a focus on carbohydrate consumption during cycling and during racing and even in training. I think people thought maybe for a race I'll have a gel or two, and then outside of that just carb load with a giant plate of pasta the night before and I'll be fine.
Exactly. Yeah.
and now it can be very calculated, but I think the biggest thing is that it's just more. I think people are eating more, they're drinking more, and that's the other thing is I think some people get intimidated by the idea of having so much to eat during a race or during a training ride. But I think a lot of people are switching to those liquid calories, whether it's gels, or what I really like to do is just to drink sugar and drink carbohydrates. For me, I really don't like eating and chewing on the bike. I just like to just drink it. And I find that so much easier. And it's also easier for me to stomach. Yeah. I don't feel like I have to digest anything. It just feels like drinking from a water bottle. And I think that shift in the past about 10 years or so, I think is the biggest thing, where the numbers are getting higher and training's getting better and recovery's getting better, just because the carbohydrate consumption is going up and up, and people are learning how to train their guts and prepare for these races. And I think it's so underrated still. I think there's a lot of people that don't really think about it, or they've never calculated it before. It's not something that you need to weigh out your food for every single race or ride, but it's something that maybe once or twice you just measure it out to see exactly how much you're having, and then kind of go from there. If you felt super good, then I think you're set and you just keep doing that. And if you felt like you were really tired at the end of the race, your recovery wasn't as good as it could have been, I think kind of increasing that intake, whether it's calories, carbohydrates, just increasing that intake from there and kind of just going up and seeing what happens with that. It's something that I think a lot of people are intimidated by, because they think it's super scientific and complicated, but it's really not. Once you practice it once or twice, yep, and you can see how much of a difference it makes in your performance, and then you'll just get hooked on it. You're like, wow, if I eat another gel or two, or have another bottle with another 50 or 60 or 70 grams of carbohydrates, all of a sudden I used to be really tired the last 5K of the race. Now I feel like I can sprint on fresh legs, and for some people it's that big of a difference.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I guess I'm just thinking about when I first started getting into cycling esports, and typically the cycling esports events tend to be a lot shorter than road races you and I have, have raced in the past, and so I guess my mentality was, well, these races are 45 minutes to an hour and 15 at the most. I don't need to load in the same way. I don't need to fuel throughout that in the same way. And then actually, you and I shared a coach for some time last year as well, and I learned a lot more about this. But I guess it links. Does it link to the intensity? Because the cycling sports events are shorter, but they're much more intense. So, do we need to approach it in the same way? From that point of view, and like say, how do we? Is it important for these short races? I guess you said yes.
Yeah, yeah. It's one of those things. When it comes to racing, I think it's one of those things where the main thing that I think about is that if it's 30, 40 minutes or maybe up to an hour, there's no benefit to not eating. There's no benefit to not having calories. It's not like you're gonna like save weight or affect your recovery or anything like that. It's like you could have an extra gel or two. You can have an extra 50 grams of carbs of sugar, and it's only going to help or do nothing. So it's one of those things that I think it's really simple in that way. I think if you're talking about gels and really nice sports nutrition gels, maybe it's the cost. I think for a lot of people to think about having multiple gels every single ride, every single day, that's probably too much. It gets very expensive. But definitely for races, there's nothing that's going to negatively affect your performance by having an extra gel halfway through a 30-minute race, because there are so many factors when it does come to that, because a lot of esport cyclists are very busy working people. So you probably were very busy the rest of the day before this event. It's not like you had your team chef prepare your meal 3 hours before the race and it was measured out rice and chicken and all this. It's like you probably just had a meal a couple hours ago, and then you were busy, you were stressed, and then maybe you haven't hydrated enough or didn't have enough carbs in the last meal. So it's one of those things that you really want to pay attention to that. And then during your warm up too, I think a lot of people wait until the race starts to eat, or they'll wait 15, 20 minutes. I think fueling during the warm up is probably more important because you're already burning calories. You're already sweating during the warm up, and you're already emptying your tank during that warm up. And then if you keep filling it up, I mean, the rest of the race, you'll just be good to go.
Yeah. So, it happens. I've got kids, right? So, this happens that when they have too much sugar, and it happens this time of year especially, Zach, as I'm sure you understand, that you see the spike in energy, both physical and psychologically as well. And then they have that crash. Is there a risk when you're racing that could happen as well? So is it one of those things that when you start to put glucose or fructose, glycogen, whatever form you're utilizing there into the body, that you've got to keep that going?
That's a great question. I haven't thought about it from that perspective before, because I've never, I think it's one of those things that I would never think that it's a sugar crash. I think when you bonk, you probably run out of sugar rather than having too much sugar and then having a sugar crash off of that. But that's a really interesting idea. I think there are so many other factors when you're exercising at a certain level of intensity. I think it would be really hard for your body to crash if you're pushing zone 3 or zone 4 and your heart rate's elevated, you're sweating and really working hard. But I think
you're just going to be utilizing it, right? Yeah,
I think so. Yeah. But after the race, I think that's when it's more likely to happen. I think if you finish a race and then you don't eat for a while, maybe your stomach is upset or something, or you go and take a shower, you have to get to a work meeting right away. You're just busy, and you don't have a recovery shake within an hour. You don't have a carbohydrate drink. Maybe you just sip on a glass of water. I think maybe an hour or two after the race, that's when sometimes I felt my energy levels really, really come down. And I think fueling for that part is like you're saying, it's really important, because you're not just fueling your legs during the exercise, during the race, you're fueling kind of the rest of your day, especially if you race in the morning or the middle of the day. I mean, you can't just, unless you're a professional cyclist, you probably can't go sit on the couch for 6 hours for the rest of the day.
No, I'm not sure that work or my wife would allow that to happen to recover. I must admit. No, that's really interesting as well. I think, yeah, I mean, what about during training then, from that point of view? Because we spoke about racing, but then, like I mentioned, those live training sessions there where I'm doing sessions or with the community there where we're doing 40-20s, we're doing VO2 work, which is really absorbing those glycogen stores that you've got in your body as well. So should we be fueling during training? I know that we're going to talk about the post training and post race stuff as well. You mentioned the cost as well, and I guess that's something we've got to mention there. And I appreciate cost is one of those things. I mean, what I did, rightly or wrongly, is I've got a big bag of maltodextrin, I've got a big bag of fructose, and I'm mixing my own from that point of view as well. And I actually started doing that last year just so I could get the mix right, because the mix that I was using on the shorter stuff is different than the stuff that I was utilizing when I did the Gran Fondo World Champs, for example. For more slow release, fast release, fast absorption type sugars there. But what about from a training point of view? Should we be utilizing fuel to make sure we hit every rep at the right intensity as well, or is it something just for training, just for racing?
Yeah, I'm first of all, I'm glad you brought up the maltodextrin and fructose, because that's exactly what I do. I do the exact same thing, and I've been doing that for probably a couple years now, where it was one of those things where it was just the cost. It was just so much to keep up with that when I was doing, higher volume, higher intensity training. You think about fueling for every single ride, and it's like, I don't want to spend $10 on ride food every single day. It adds up really, really fast. So
Yeah.
the maltodextrin and fructose, I don't know if I've calculated how much it is per bottle, but it's less than $1. It's probably less than 50 cents when you add it all up. Just buy it in bulk and then weigh it out for every ride, and then that way I like to add different flavors to it, which is really easy. You never get burnt out on the same brand or the same flavor of like a sugar drink or something like that. But when it comes to training rides, fueling is definitely important for those, and I think there's probably different ranges that I would aim for based on the intensity. So I think zone one rides less than an hour, that's the only time when I would say totally fine to just have water, where if you
Yep.
don't have anything, you'll probably be fine. If you're bonking on a zone one ride, there's probably something else wrong. You probably haven't eaten for 8 hours or something, or you probably need to go back to bed. But when it comes to zone two training, I would say 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrates an hour is the range for that, which is a pretty big range. It's basically 30 or double that. And I think that's more a personal preference and also your level as a cyclist, because if you're close to the professional level, your zone two could be over 300 watts. So at that rate, you're burning a lot of calories and a lot of carbohydrates. So you're probably on the higher end for that. Whereas if you're a more beginner level or a smaller rider, maybe your zone two is 80, 90 watts. So at that level, you probably don't need 60 grams of carbohydrates an hour. It's a lot on your stomach. And that's probably the range that I would do for zone two training. Then for zone three, zone four, I would probably go between 60 and 100 grams of carbohydrates an hour. So if you're doing
Got it. Okay.
2 by 20 minutes at tempo, you're burning through a lot of glycogen, a lot of calories. So that I would say is close to race level fueling. And again, the bigger
Yeah.
riders, higher power, I would go on the higher end of that. And then lighter riders, I would maybe try 60 or 70 and see how that feels. And then anything above that, I mean, above zone four, I would basically say race intensity. So you're talking 40-20s, 30-30s, those super high intensity workouts.
Yep.
I would say those around 100 grams of carbs an hour. And then that one, the range can be much bigger, because if you're not used to that, if your gut isn't trained for that, 100 grams of carbs an hour is a lot. It's a lot of sugar. So I would maybe start a little bit below that and see how that feels for a few sessions. I would definitely try all of this in training before doing it in a race. You definitely, if anything goes wrong, you want to be able to just stop the ride, then skip the intervals and do a cool down, rather than be in the middle of a race and feel like you need a bucket or something.
No, that makes absolute sense, though, right? Because that's, I guess, one of the reasons why you want to be doing this during training sessions, because there is that sort of gastro aspect that you need your body and your gut to be able to process it effectively and efficiently without any problems. Because, I've had it before when I was running back in the day with gels and it doesn't sit right, then, there's issues can happen from that point of view. So I think, yeah, it's another reason to do it, right? So your body, you're used to taking on fuel at speed, at intensity, and like I say, at that volume. But that's the other thing, Zach, that I've noticed has changed over the last 10 years. I worked for an Australian nutrition brand many years back selling energy gels. And if I think about the volume in terms of grams of carbohydrate that was in those gels compared to some of the gels and the fuel now, it's almost 3 times as much carbohydrates and I think that there used to be, but it's also the way that they balance that. We mentioned maltodextrin and fructose and stuff. It's, I guess the science has just come along. And when we spoke to Tadej Pogacar on the show, me and Matt were sort of picking his brains there. He was saying, look, this is a massive change. What we can put in as professional cyclists during a ride in an hour is completely different that they were doing in the 90s, or even the noughties from that point of view. So there's been a lot of research on this fueling side that's really changed the game of what you can put into the body, Zach.
Yeah, it's so funny, reading about what they used to do. And back then, I think, probably 10, 20 plus years ago, the race level fueling was like 50 to 60 grams of carbs an hour, which now is like what I recommend for like zone 2 rides. It's like, it's crazy. I mean, back then it's amazing that people were as fast as they were, because it's like their bodies were just running on empty. I mean, 5.5 hours into a Tour de France stage and they've had a couple hundred calories of sugar. And now it's like 2,000 calories plus that riders are having during a stage, and they've trained their bodies to process that and to fuel that way. And the power output in the final hours, the same as it was in the first hour. And it's just amazing. And I think it's an interesting talking point for esports cycling, because the races are so much shorter. So I think, like we've talked about, I think there's a lot of people that don't think it matters, or it doesn't matter as much, but it's one of those things where it's pretty individual. But again, there's never really a penalty to having more. There's not a penalty to having
doing it anyway.
Yeah. If you're having
makes
80 grams
sense
of carbs 30 minutes into an hour long esport race, or you're having 120, I mean, there's no penalty there. I mean, it's only going to help. So I think that's one of those things to try it out. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, I know we're on cycling esports, but just going back there to thinking about Grand Tours, right? There used to be, when I used to watch it in the 90s, there was a lot of long days without the same level of intensity for the guys at the pointy end than there is now. That you can watch a Grand Tour and it's kicking off from day one, and there's another 20 odd days to go, right? So I don't think the racing is the same, but also in esports, I'm just thinking back to the MyWhoosh Championships a few years back, where we got a multi-day event. I'm doing the Tour de Monde with OTR, which is going to kick off in 2 days' time as well, which is pretty much 12 days of racing. That fueling every ride, every day, sort of during and post, is going to make sure that you can repeat that same intensity or a similar intensity if you need to the next day. I guess the other things that we've quickly got to touch on before we get into zone 2 training is, you mentioned there that you fuel via a bottle, not gels from that point of view. So does that mean the same bottle is also, from a hydration point of view, viewpoint, replacing your fluids?
Yeah, so I like to do plain water during races as well. So I wouldn't have just the sugar mix. For me, that's just a personal preference, where I know a lot of guys who just do the sugar drinks and that works for them. For me, I like to have a gel before the race that sits better in my stomach, and it's easier to have it. I mean, when you're sitting in the pen, 10, 20 minutes to go. For me, I never like having to worry about grabbing something or opening something or chewing on something during a race. So I always have the gel before and then just drink during. So for me, taste wise and stomach wise, I like to have a little bit of plain water during the races, and keeping up with that. Again, it's another thing where the limit for that is pretty much as you can stomach. Whatever upsets your stomach, just do less than that, because I mean, you definitely don't want to go a full hour of racing without drinking at all. And then it's only going to help if you have half a bottle versus a bottle in an hour long race. It's not something that is really going to do any damage. And it's another one of those things where it's, I think it's a very common answer with all these questions, but it depends. And I think it depends on your training environment. And I know a lot of people that maybe in the summer, their training setup is in the garage and they have one fan. So it just, in the summer, it's just super, super hot. And then
Yep.
there's other people, maybe those up in Norway right now, where in the winter their training room is freezing. Maybe their training room is, the air temperature is actually a few degrees above freezing. So when they get on the bike, it's super super cold. But then as soon as they get into the race, they're at a really nice temperature. So that's another one of those things where if it's super hot and humid, you're going to sweat a ton. Whereas if it's colder, you're probably not going to sweat as much. So it's another thing to keep in mind and pay attention to with all the fueling and hydration with all that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Hydration is. I suffered a lot in the early days with cramps and things like that. So I went for sweat testing and all sorts when I was a young, I won't say athlete, but younger rider. Let me put it that way. So for me, hydration has always been in one of those areas when it comes to nutrition that I've spent a bit of time studying and so on. So I think for me, I don't use plain water. I am full on electrolyte tablets. Get the sodium and magnesium back in, for all sorts of reasons, and I find that help. But I guess it's also one of those things that you've got to find your own, what works for you from a body point of view as well. But there are things that you can do, I think, from that point of view, like weighing yourself pre and post ride. I went through a phase of doing that to see how much fluid that I'd lost during a ride in the summer months as opposed to the winter months that you and I are sitting in the northern hemisphere right now. And typically that weight that you lose during that ride tends to be fluid. And again, when you sweat, you're going to lose sodium. I think I was losing about 1,300 milligrams of sodium per liter of sweat. So it's like, I got to basically double up on the tablets to replace that sodium. And I think there's an issue there as well. We'll go into these things a bit more detail, that if you're losing sodium's like a key transporter for glycogen through the cells as well. That also has a knock-on impact. I think that's another topic for another day, Zach, because we're going to talk about hydration in more detail. I know that we had a chat pre-production as well. We're going to talk about post-ride recovery, protein in a later show as well. Because I know we're already approaching 43 minutes, and we've got to talk about Zone 2, Zach, because this is the time of year where people are thinking about Zone 2 rides, base training. Maybe, like I say, they've got some event in the spring, or there's an event that they're targeting. Typically in the Northern Hemisphere, that's when we do it. So tell us about Zone 2, or the endurance zone, as I like to call it.
Yeah, Zone 2 is a really big topic, a really interesting topic, because so many people know the term, but I don't think a lot of people really understand what it means. And there's so many different definitions. So to keep it as simple as possible, I'll focus on for cycling. For cycling, I would say Zone 2 power-based is around 60 to 70% FTP. So for me, a Zone 2 ride is 65% FTP. That I would call that strict Zone 2. If you rode on erg mode at 65% FTP, keeping it right there, right at that intensity, I would say that's strict Zone 2. And that's where I think the biggest benefits are from Zone 2 training is rather than doing like a hilly route where you're Zone 2 of the climbs, then coast down the descents, then Zone 2, or up and down, or maybe I think a lot of people when they ride outside, they get stuck on group rides where it's Zone 2 when you're pulling on the front, but then if you're 2 or 3 rows back sitting in the draft, you're riding at 50 watts. And the Zone 2, you probably did, if you do a 3-hour ride, maybe you were in Zone 2 for 45 minutes or an hour, and then the rest of it in Zone 1. It's not completely lost training time. It's still helping. There's still the benefits there. But I think nowadays, and with me and my schedule and you and so many other people, I mean, we don't have 15, 20 hours a week to train. We're trying to cram as much fitness gaining training into like maybe 3, 4, 5 hours, maybe 8 or 10 hours on the high end. So it's like you want every ride and every interval to count. So I like to do my zone 2 training that way, where instead of 3 hours outside with a group with hills, I'll do 60 to 90 minutes on the trainer. I think erg mode strict zone 2 is really hard mentally. I know a lot of guys that have done that before. I used to see a couple of guys that would do 3 hours erg mode, 65% FTP. And I'm just
Yeah.
like, I
Oh.
feel like mentally I'm pretty strong, but the idea of that is I've tried it for an hour before and it felt like 3 hours. Like I can't imagine doing that every single zone 2 ride. But I think doing that in free rides, I think as long as you're used to it, as long as you're paying attention and kind of keeping that intensity there, I think the benefits from that are huge.
It's a really good point though, right? Because I still ride with the guys on a Sunday out here on a cafe ride, and we're out for 4 hours. But Mrs. B doesn't particularly like it every weekend to do it. But you're drafting, you're freewheeling. You're sat in the wheels there. That probably I'm only riding zone 2 for on a 4 hour ride, maybe an hour, if I'm lucky sometimes. And if I look at the average watts, the normalized power, it's generally pretty low. So yeah, you're probably right. We could probably ride zone 2 much more efficiently indoors because you don't freewheel, you don't stop, you can hold that power without the worry of traffic lights and roundabouts and junctions and all these kind of things that you get when you're riding outdoors. So what are the key benefits then physiologically, Zach? Why do we do zone 2 training?
So zone 2 training is basically just below your aerobic threshold, which is kind of that first threshold where your blood lactate starts to increase significantly. So that's zone 3, zone 4. I think experienced cyclists probably know that feeling. Once you go into tempo or zone 4, like threshold intervals, you feel like, oh, this is really hard to hold this for
Yeah,
10,
you're sort
20
of balancing
minutes.
that intensity, right, to manage it.
Yeah. Whereas zone 2, if you keep it below that threshold, it's much more comfortable. For me, I always notice it in my breathing. It feels I'm in control of this effort. And as soon as I go up into zone 3, it's like, oh, this is hard. I really have to pay attention. Zone 2 is like, I could do this all day. I could do this for a few hours. I could do this. I mean, you have to keep up with the feeling, but it's one of those paces where it should be relatively comfortable. And the benefits of that are physiologically, it's all across the board. I think I've seen studies and papers and everything from it. It helps your aerobic engine, that endurance engine. I think that's a pretty direct correlation, but it also has
Yep.
those effects on your VO2 max and those higher power outputs, because I really like to think of it. I like to think of training in kind of 2 different ways. There's kind of pushing your fitness up and there's pulling your fitness up. So VO2 max intervals, like those 500 or 600 watt intervals for 20, 30 seconds, you're kind of pulling your fitness up from those really high power
Yep.
zones. Zone 2, you're kind of taking your base and you're just pushing it up. So if I can comfortably ride
Yep.
at 200 watts, if you do more zone 2
Makes
training,
sense.
push your fitness up. Now I'm comfortable at 210. Now I'm comfortable at 220. So in those races, in those moments, whether it's on the flat or on a descent or kind of in between the attacks and climbs, I mean, maybe if you're zone 2 super high, there's some guys in Cat 1 that you look at their files and they go down to 300 watts and their heart rate drops and they're recovering. And it's like, if you can get your fitness to that level, it makes all those efforts just so much easier to recover from. And then the better you recover, the higher you can go on the next interval, the more energy you have on the next interval. So it's just one of those things that it affects your fitness from both sides, from the lower end, but also from the higher end.
It makes absolute sense. That I really like that push-pull, analogy, because, like I say, if you're pulling that up or pushing that up, then the whole thing moves. Every bit of efficiency moves throughout the whole training system. So, and I guess that's what it's about, right? It's improving that efficiency. You mentioned there, about how do you keep these things interesting and exciting, or engaging. In fact, it's obviously a lot easier now because we've got many different worlds here on MyWhoosh that you can ride in. You can come and do the live sessions. In fact, my live sessions the last couple of weeks, I've been doing the base rides. I've been actually doing the cadence changes. And that's something I wanted to ask you. And again, it's a selfish question. I do apologise to the community there, but the community have been joining me on these rides. That there's a lot of these cadence changer workouts that we've got there in MyWhoosh with the 720 plus workouts. I know you've designed a lot of them there, Zach, where you could do an hour of zone 2, but changing the cadence from 80 RPM up to 120 RPM, and it's really interesting. The power zone maintains the same, but my heart rate in particular is fluctuating sort of 15 beats per minute between the different cadences. So again, bringing in those different adaptations could make it just really interesting. But it's interesting that you focused on zone 2 power, not zone 2 heart rate.
Yeah, that's one of those things that I think the heart rate I really like personally, and I think I have so much experience with it that I know my zones really well, and I know how it correlates with the power and the feeling. I think there's a lot of people that they don't know as much about the heart rate as they do about the power. For the power, it's very easy to. This is my FTP. 65% of that is this number, so I'm going to stick it at this number. Whereas heart rate, it can be affected by so many other factors like sleep and caffeine and stress and whether you're working. I know when I ride at 5 a.m., my heart rate's super low versus if I ride in the evening or the middle of the day, my heart rate is more at a normal level. It's higher during exercise and it's higher max heart rate too. So it's one of those things that it does fluctuate a bit more. So I would definitely shoot for a range with zone 2. Like for me, it's 135 beats a minute to 145 beats a minute. Whereas zone 2, I could more comfortably kind of stick it at one number and say, this is what I'm going to aim for and keep it a lot closer with that. But yeah, heart rate I love the heart rate training. I think a lot of people underappreciate heart rate training. For the first, I think 3 or 4 years of my cycling career, I didn't have a power meter. My dad didn't let me get one because he wanted me to understand my heart rate and my physiology and how everything felt. He wanted me to learn the feeling rather than there's a lot of people that start with the power meter and they think, well, if I'm at this number, this is how I feel, rather than the other way around. It's like you shouldn't be pacing yourself on a climb and think, oh, if I go over 400 watts, I'm going to blow up. Because it's like, well, that can help inform your decision making, but you're never going to progress. You're never going to set a PR. You're never going to actually race the race if you just stick to those numbers. So that's probably like another tangent for another day. But
yeah, no, I can totally relate. These kids don't know how lucky they've got it today, Zach. So I had the very similar discussion saying, what do you need all this technology for, son? You don't even need a GPS these days. That kind of mentality. I want to ask you a question, Zach, and I apologize, I didn't ask you this in pre-production, so this will be an interesting one here. And I want you to think about this answer from two perspectives, right? Is you mentioned that understanding your power zone 2. What if you're new to the platform, or you're even new to cycling, right? Or you're new to structured training. So think about this from a 2 point of view. Someone like me, who's been on the bike a long time, my FTP of the last year has fluctuated depending where I am in a training cycle. And then think about someone who's new to cycling, new to the platform, into the new year, wants to get fitter and healthier. How do we evaluate what our zone 2 is? Now, I know about ramp tests, very uncomfortable sometimes, from that point of view. So arguably, Zach, I could go out and do a ramp test and figure out my power zones from there. But is that if I try, basically what I'm saying is, someone like my wife, dare I say, who I'm trying to get on the bike, if I go and put her on a ramp test straight away, Emma, she is probably not going to want to do it. She's not going to push herself as hard. So how do people calculate their power zones, Zach?
I think it's a very good question. I'll give you 2 different answers, and then if you want more details, I can give you more details. But the 2 things that popped in my head were, one is a basic talking test. I would say if you're on the bike and you're pedaling at a certain effort, a certain power output or heart rate, can you have a conversation fairly comfortably? Can you say a full sentence without having to pause every second or third word to take a breath and and keep going? And then I think, so that's the first test. The second test, I would say, just mentally see if you can, whether it's on your phone or maybe a book, see if you can read a page or a paragraph and see if you can get through that without having to reread the same sentence over and over and over. Because I bet if you're riding middle of zone 3, it's going to be really hard to focus and to get through an entire paragraph without rereading those sentences. So I would probably use those tests if you have nothing else.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense, because I think, like say, I know that I go and do a Power Passport test, or I go and do a ramp test or something like that if I really want to know where I am. But I would also do something similar to you, as you mentioned there, that I also think about RPE, right? The ratings of perceived exertion, 0 to 10. How does it feel? Can you talk comfortably? I know that if I get in, I always talk about this in the live sessions, that zone 2, you can talk comfortably on a cafe ride. When someone sees the coffee shop and they start to push on a little bit harder, and you're like, you can still talk, but the sentence is a little bit shorter, a little bit more staccato from that point of view. I've just gone into zone 3, and when no one's talking, you're at threshold basically, and then it's full gas sprint. So there's a lot to be said, Zach, right? You're right, for being able to talk and just how it feels, from that point of view. So if you are new to the platform, Zach, just get on, start riding, explore. And just do, I guess, the intensity that's comfortable. And then at some point, when you've built a little bit of that base fitness, that's when you can start to look in some of the testing folders that we have on MyWhoosh and find, let's say, whether it be the Power Passport test, or I think we've got a couple of other testing rides that are in there, to find out more specifically your training zones from that point of view. Does that seem fair enough?
Yes, 100%. Yeah.
Have I summarized that well?
Yes, very well.
Brilliant. Zach, it's been an absolute pleasure. As always, we've unlocked more topics for the future there again, because I also want to explore the sort of the protein and the post-ride nutrition as well. And I guess as we get closer to sort of February, March, and the sort of the finals, and we ramp up with SRC and other events that are coming in the future here at MyWhoosh as well, and maybe people are getting outdoors, we can start to explore some of the VO2 zones and some more detail on 40-20s and fatigue resistance and things like that. Lots of topics, but as always, I really appreciate you joining us here on the show again, and as head coach at MyWhoosh, and we'll get you back early February time. It's a long month, isn't it? January, 5 weeks, so maybe we'll get you back in before the end of January. But what are your plans in January, Zach, just before we sign off?
Yeah, January is a lot of double race weekends with Echelon Racing League on Saturday and then Sunday Race Club on Sunday. So it's something I'm not used to. I'm used to just having just SRC for a long, long time, just that one race to focus on. So a lot of intervals, a lot of recovery, not much training during the week because that's a lot of intensity on the weekend. So it'll be interesting to see if my fitness
zone 2 in the week then.
Yeah, exactly. It'll be interesting to see if my fitness goes up and up and up, or if it goes up and then I have a bad week, and then it goes up, and then I have a bad. It'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, it's amazing, right? And that you can being able to watch those metrics on a weekly basis when you've had what's perceived to be a lighter week sometimes is motivational, sometimes demotivating. But Zach, really appreciate you joining us. We'll be watching for those results in the new setup of the Sunday Race Club over in January as well, and hopefully everyone's fitness and strength and results also improve there as well. So if you not signed up yet, go ahead and sign up to the new Sunday Race Club as well. I hope everyone enjoyed the MyWhoosh 300. We've got more challenges and more events coming in the future as well. Of course, I think we're going to see season 2 of the season pass. Zach, you and I have been looking at the different challenges and rewards for that over the last couple of weeks as well. So it's going to be super interesting. New worlds also coming in January that Matt Smithson spoke about over the last couple of weeks. Thank you once again for joining us here on Inside the Ride episode 19. We'll be back next week to explore new topics, new events, because of course we've got these new events happening here on MyWhoosh. Don't forget, like, subscribe, share. Let us know how you're going on. If you have any questions for Zach or members of the MyWhoosh team, drop us a note on those social media. And we'll see you again for another Inside the Ride by MyWhoosh.
On this journey we'll guide inside the ride where we fly. Virtual roads touch the sky. Join us here, don't be shy. Inside the ride.